I have always been drawn to the stories that make you check the locks twice. The ones told in hushed tones around late night fires, or found in creased journals detailing encounters that defy all logic. From whispering ghosts in abandoned hallways to shadowy encounters in quiet woods. These are the tales of terrors that lurk just beyond the edge of our vision. So turn the lights down low and get ready to confront what goes bump in the night. You're listening to Don't Whistle to the Wind. Hello, and welcome in, my little horror fiends, to episode 8 of Don't Whistle to the Wind. On this episode, I'll be reading to you some scary stories about old, haunted ghost towns, so sit back, relax, and enjoy. Our first story is about Wichita Falls in Texas. Things in Wichita Falls don't just stay in the past, they transform, leaving outsiders with an eerie dread and the locals double-checking their locks every night. When my buddy Trevor took a job transfer to Wichita Falls, I gladly agreed to help him drive his U-Haul down from Colorado. By the time we crossed into Texas, the sun had long set and the sprawling highways of the Red River Valley stretched out before us. Trevor, exhausted from 13 hours of driving, started rubbing his eyes. "Almost there. Just gotta go over the bridge near Wellington Lake," he said, flicking on his high beams as we pushed towards Wichita Falls. But somewhere past the city limits, the GPS lost its signal. Then the blue screen flickered and died, leaving only the dashboard lights casting a dim glow in the cab. Trevor suddenly slammed on the brakes. The U-Haul screeched across the asphalt, brakes locking up, and tires smoking. "What was that?" Trevor asked, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. "What was what?" I replied. "Something large darted across the road. I almost hit it." He glanced around and waited for a few minutes, making sure nothing else was going to run across the road. But before Trevor could even put the car back into drive, the lights of the high beams went out. The engine sputtered, then died, and the dashboard lights faded to black. Total darkness swallowed us. Nothing but dead silence surrounded us until we heard it. Somewhere out in the vast, pitch-black brush, someone was crying. It wasn't a normal cry. It was off, like a recording with no emotion attached, and sounded like it was coming from the side of the road right next to us. However, the voice began to change, mutating from a sob into a maniacal laughter and high-pitched, braying screams. The blood in my veins turned to ice. Goosebumps erupted all over my arms, and panic began swelling in my chest. Next to me, Trevor sat perfectly rigid, staring straight ahead, knuckles white and trembling. "What the hell was that?" I asked, looking directly at him. That's when I saw it in the corner of my eye, standing in the middle of the road, slightly hunched over. A silhouette, vaguely the shape of a man, but wrong. It was terrifyingly tall, with long, ragged limbs, the shape of a giant goat, half-human torso, horns, hooves, and glowing red eyes that were locked onto Trevor's face. Trevor, frozen with fear, didn't hear me screaming his name hysterically to get his attention. It took me grabbing and shaking him to finally get him to snap out of it. He shook his head hard, freeing himself from the trance, and then roughly turned the car key. Miraculously, the engine started, dashboard lights and headlights turned on, and when we looked back towards the road, the creature was gone. Trevor slammed his foot on the gas and he didn't stop driving until we reached the outskirts of downtown. Not too long after, we made it to his apartment. I am home now. But even though I'm miles away, Back in my own apartment, I can still hear the disturbing maniacal laughter and the high-pitched braying screams faintly outside my bedroom window every night since then. Our second story is about Jerome, Arizona. I've always loved history, and my partner James is a total sucker for old ghost towns. That's how we ended up in Jerome, Arizona, the town that clings to the side of Mingus Mountain. By day it's charming, with art galleries and sweeping views of the Verde Valley. By night, it is an isolated nightmare. We booked a room at the famous Jerome Grand Hotel, which originally was the United Verde Hospital in 1926. That should have been my first warning. When we arrived at dusk, the fog had rolled in, making the steep, narrow highway leading up to the town feel like we were driving into the underworld. Check-in was quick, and we made our way through the lobby. The original 1926 self-service elevator was something straight out of a horror movie. A clanking, grated cage that you had to operate yourself. As we rode it up to the third floor, it shuddered and jerked violently between floors before coming to a dead stop. The lights flickered out. We were stuck in complete darkness, and I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me when the sound of a metal gurney wheeled past above us. For what seemed like an eternity, we stayed still, listening and not daring to move, when suddenly the lights flickered back on. We looked at each other and both gave a nervous chuckle before we continued upwards. When we finally found room 32, the atmosphere was off and suffocating. I brushed it off as exhaustion from our long drive. We unpacked our bags, settling in for the night, and I went straight into the bathroom to do my nightly routine. That's when the first real incident happened. I was leaning over the sink to rinse my face when the bathroom door, which I had left wide open, violently slammed shut. The click of the lock echoed in the small space. Startled and confused, I called out to James. But then the overhead lights shattered. I was plunged into total darkness, save for the faint glow under the door from our room. Then, the water in the sink turned on, full blast. I scrambled backwards, hitting the wall, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I sat there panicking, shallow breaths, while my head spun trying to figure out what to do, and why this was happening. I knew I had to get out of this bathroom. I shakily got up and quickly made my way to the door, trying my hardest to ignore the sink still running as I moved past it. When I finally fumbled with the lock and burst out of the bathroom, the bedroom was entirely empty. James was gone, and the balcony door was standing wide open, letting in the cold mountain wind. I ran to the balcony. Panic rising, I started to think that James had fallen, or worse, he had jumped. Looking down the dark cliffside, I started hysterically screaming his name. The echo of my voice, my only response. My eyes desperately searched for him in the darkness below, but that's when I noticed something. Through my blurry tears, I saw dim, slow, pulsing lights where the mine shaft sat. It looked as though the old, abandoned copper mine shafts were breathing. I took a step back, rubbing my eyes hard, wiping away the tears, shaking my head to clear my thoughts. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw them. Right on the balcony railing, a set of wet, muddy paw prints were pressed into the wood. Small, feline prints. The hotel staff had warned us about the phantom cat that supposedly roams the halls, brushing up against guests. I initially laughed at the warning, but this was terrifyingly real. I heard the noise of the old elevator operating itself in the hallway. Clink, clink, shudder. It sounded like it was moving upwards. Thinking it was James, I ran out the door to lecture him for scaring me. The doors, however, opened, and no one was inside. I stared for a moment, even more confused when unseen footsteps started running towards me. Fear and adrenaline took over. I didn't even try to rationalize what I was hearing and hightailed it back to our room, but made the mistake of leaving the door wide open as I sprinted into the bathroom and locked myself in. I am still locked in the bathroom with the lights off. I can hear heavy breathing and coughing just on the other side of the bathroom door, and the floorboards are groaning beneath the heavy, dragging footsteps of something that I know for a fact isn't James. I don't know where he is, and I don't know what came out of those dark, abandoned mines, but it found me. It knows I'm in here, and it keeps testing the handle and pushing on the door. I'm stuck in here waiting until morning light so I can leave this terrifying town. Please, do not go visit Jerome, and if you do not stay till dark, and especially do not stay in the hotel or room 32. Our third story is about Bodie, California. I've always been obsessed with the lawless, booming history of the gold rush, and Bodie, California was the Holy Grail. Situated high up in the desolate scrubland of the Eastern Sierra, the place feels entirely hidden from the modern world. There are over 100 wooden buildings preserved in arrested decay, left exactly as they were when the last miners packed up and vanished. It was a brisk, late September afternoon, and because it was the off-season, the main crowds were gone. I paid my $8 entry fee at the gate and walked out into the vast, empty expanse of the town. The brochure warns you to stay on the designated paths. It also warns you about the Bodie curse. Legend claims that if you take even a pebble, a shard of glass, or a rusty nail, a string of terrible, life-ruining misfortune will follow you home. Tourists dismiss it as a clever ranger trick to stop theft, but I was about to learn just how real the curse actually was. I wandered past the old cane store and peeked through a grime-caked window. Inside, supplies were still sitting on the shelves, heavily coated in nearly a century of undisturbed dust. The wind howled through the slats of the nearby wood frame houses, sounding almost like a human wailing in the distance. Deeper, I walked into the town. I wanted to see the famous Deschambault Hotel and the Miners' Union Hall, so I, of course, broke the rules. I strayed off the dirt road and into a narrow alley between two collapsing, weathered houses. That's when I noticed that the absolute silence of the high desert had become too loud. The typical wind died instantly. The temperature started dropping rapidly. It felt less like a brisk autumn day and more like I'd stepped into a freezer. I pulled out my phone to check the time. The screen glitched and died. I kept walking when my foot hit something, almost tripping me. Looking down, I realized my boot had directly hit against a large, preserved iron spike sticking out of the dirt. It was a classic railroad spike, a gleaming piece of history just sitting there. I rationalized that I wasn't taking it home. I just wanted to take it out onto the dirt road so I could get a better look at it in the sunlight. I reached down and yanked it from the earth. Immediately, the ground emitted a deep, shuddering vibration. A sound like heavy, metallic grinding echoed beneath my feet, as if a massive ore elevator was plummeting deep down into a mine shaft directly beneath me. I stumbled backwards and dropped the spike. It hit the dirt with a dull, heavy thud. When I looked at it again, it didn't look like an old, rusted piece of iron anymore. It looked real. No dirt, no scuffs, nothing. As if time hadn't ruined it. I turned and ran. I didn't look for the path. I just bolted in the direction of the park entrance, my breath tearing raggedly from my lungs in the thin, high-altitude air. As I fled through the ghost town, The buildings seemed to shift. What should have been the main road ended abruptly in a wall of abandoned houses. I rounded a corner, only to realize I was running in circles, passing the same window with the flour sacks inside that I had seen an hour prior. The town was sprawled out, contorted, trying to confuse me. A shadow flitted across the window of the Mendocino Bank. I stopped dead in my tracks. A man was standing inside. He was wearing a 19th century tattered denim, heavily coated in white dust. His face wasn't hollow or monstrous. It was completely normal, but his eyes were wide, bloodshot, and bulging out of his skull as he stared directly at me. He pressed his hand against the glass and opened his mouth, and though I heard no sound, I saw his lips form a single agonizing plea. Leave. I couldn't breathe. I don't know why I did it, but I turned back around and grabbed the spike from the dirt where I had dropped it, sprinting blindly toward the sound of the highway. I vaulted over a wooden perimeter fence and didn't stop until I collided with my parked rental car. Sobbing, I threw the spike onto the passenger seat, cranked the engine, and slammed my foot on the accelerator. I tore down the dirt road, my rearview mirror reflecting the retreating town as it finally dissolved into the high desert landscape. I thought I had escaped. I was wrong. Even though I threw the spike into a river on the drive back to Oregon, the curse followed me. Every night since I got back, right at 3 a.m., the temperature in my house drops to freezing. The dry, heavy scent of old wood and metallic iron fills my bedroom, and a series of events soon followed after. I was fired from my job with no explanation, got into a bad car accident that should have killed me. My house almost caught on fire due to electrical issues, and more. Last night, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door slowly creaking open. When I forced my eyes open, a figure completely coated in gray dust was standing in the doorway. He was just standing there, motionless, his bulging eyes locked onto mine, holding out a piece of dark iron, reminding me to return what I had taken. I did drive back to the stretch where I stupidly threw the spike out of my car window, and I searched for it, diving into the river and blindly feeling for it. But it was gone. The Bodhi curse is real. I live the nightmare of it every single day and night. I see the man in my peripheral vision, in the shadows of my house, and he appears in my bedroom doorway every night, moving closer, inch by inch, each time. I'm afraid of what will happen when the man finally reaches my bed. Heed the warnings if you ever visit Bodhi, and for the love of God, please do not touch or take anything. Our fourth story is about Rhyolite, Nevada. I had been planning for months to do one last road trip before college, and one of the stops I had planned to visit along the way was Rhyolite in Nevada. I arrived at the abandoned ghost town right around golden hour. The notorious concrete ruins and the famous ghost-like statues loomed against a purple sky. It was dead quiet, save for the crunch of my own boots while wandering the ruins. The town had an eerie, unsettling vibe to it. As I walked, the Cook Bank building appeared to shift positions, and the paved road I used to enter simply vanished into another row of crumbling windowless houses. When I turned around, the highway was also gone, replaced by endless, looping rows of ruins I hadn't passed before. I thought maybe I had gotten turned around and tried to retrace my steps, getting nowhere, feeling like I was still going around in circles, becoming more and more confused. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon, the silence of the desert was broken. It wasn't the sound of coyotes or vultures grunting above. It was the sound of heavy scraping, like wet concrete dragging against gravel. My curiosity got the better of me, and I walked towards the sound. Peering through the skeletal ruins of the Overbury building, I saw them. The plaster statues created by the artist seemed to have multiplied. The haunting, shrouded figures were no longer standing still. In the dark, they moved with agonizingly slow, unnatural jerks, but turned their headless, featureless faces directly toward me when I gasped too loudly. They all began to rush towards me. I quickly turned away and bolted. My phone flashlight useless against the suffocating darkness of the desert. The landscape twisted, the empty houses multiplying in my peripheral vision until I was hopelessly turned around yet again. Every time I stopped to catch my breath, a scrape and thump noise echoed closer behind me. It was as if the ghost town itself was folding in on me, actively blocking my escape to the highway. I managed to scale a barbed wire fence, ripping my jacket and tearing the skin of my hands in the process, stumbling back onto the paved highway I had astonishingly found again. I didn't look back to see if those plaster abominations followed me. I sprinted back to my car, cranked my ignition, threw my car into gear, and drove as fast as I could. Terrified, the town was still rearranging the roads behind me. I survived, but I still have the red, jagged scars on my hands from the fence. Even worse, I can't shake the feeling that a piece of me never actually left that godforsaken stretch of the Mojave Desert. Our fifth story is about Cahaba, Alabama. Driving out to Old Cahaba Archaeological Park sounds like a fun day trip into Alabama's history, but it was anything but fun. I arrived around 3 p.m., eager to see the ruins and the lonely St. Luke's Episcopal Church. The humidity was suffocating, and the heavy canopy of Spanish moss made the deep woods feel claustrophobic. I spent my first 2 hours walking the dirt roads and reading the fading markers of a town that disappeared. Around 4:30 p.m., I decided to take the trail to the new cemetery. The map I had warned me that the park gates closed promptly at 5 p.m., and anyone caught inside would be locked in until morning. But I was so completely absorbed by the atmosphere that I unfortunately lost track of time. When I finally checked my watch, it was 4:55 p.m. I sprinted back toward the main road, the one that leads to the visitor center, except the path didn't look right. The worn dirt trail gave away to thick, overgrown brush, and I found myself standing in front of the Castle Morgan. It was odd. I knew it shouldn't be in this spot. I hadn't had a chance to see it, but knew from the map that it was in the wrong place. I wearily approached, trying to find a way around, but the tall fencing put in place from back when this was a prison, expanding as far as I could see, blocked any way around it. I pulled out my phone, hoping to call the visitor center, but when I checked, there was no signal. Of course. Cautiously, I stepped inside the decaying building, thinking there had to be another way out on the other side. Looking around, I saw some light coming into the building, which appeared to be coming from somewhere on the far end, and I made my way to it. That's when a cacophony of cries erupted all around me, desperate, pleading cries to be let out. Covering my ears, I ran, and that's when the smell hit me hard. Death, decay, sickness had my eyes watering, turning my vision blurry. I started to hear footsteps running after me. Sprinting faster, I could see the light coming from a broken window. The footsteps were right behind me when I threw myself through the window, bursting through the glass and landing hard face down into a patch of grass. I laid there for a moment, eyes closed, trying to catch my breath, gathering myself before rolling onto my back. When I opened my eyes, I was greeted by a starry night. The sun had completely set, and it was pitch black all around me. I shakily got to my feet, dizzy and disoriented, and began to look around. Nothing but grass and trees surrounded me. I was even more lost than before. Not knowing which way to go, I took one more look at Castle Morgan, choosing the tree line in front of me instead of going back through that nightmare, and started walking. Every few seconds the air around me would drop a few degrees, and I started hearing the faint echoing sound of children laughing and playing in the distance. I knew from the park's history that daytime visitors occasionally heard these phantom children playing in the woods. But now, I was no longer hearing them from a distance. The laughter sounded like it was coming from right behind my ears. I bolted, tripping over exposed tree roots and rusted iron, desperate to get back to the main road. I could feel something trailing me, and I glanced back and saw a glowing, luminous orb of white light that was bobbing between the cedar trees. Every time I stopped to catch my breath, it stopped, floating just a few feet behind me. I began running again and saw to my relief the beam of a flashlight sweeping through the trees. It was the night security guard, and his truck was parked by the front gates. He didn't seem entirely surprised to see me, just deeply concerned. He told me that I wasn't the first person to get turned around in the woods, and to see the specter in the maze, or the phantom lights after dark. I didn't tell him about the Castle Morgan or my experience with it. I just climbed into his truck and let him drive me to the exit. I'm safe at home now, but I've been having nightmares every night of those cries in Castle Morgan. Every time I close my eyes, I can still see the phantom lights and hear the sound of those children laughing from the tree line. Our sixth story is about St. Elmo, Colorado. I visited St. Elmo, Colorado with my buddy Josh one chilly evening. The empty streets and the shuttered 1880s storefronts looked like a movie set. But when I saw a pale woman in a white dress staring from a second-story hotel window, I realized why locals whisper that the town's most infamous resident never left. Josh and I had been looking for a secluded spot for some landscape photography, far from the tourist crowds that flocked to Buena Vista and Salida. We figured the famous ghost town of St. Elmo would maybe only have a handful of tourists and us. When we arrived, the historic general store and the nearby Home Comfort Hotel were boarded up and dark. The wind was whipping through the wooden boardwalks, carrying that dry, pine-scented chill that only happens right before the first snow. Josh set up his tripod near Chipmunk Crossing, but I decided to walk down Poplar Street. There is something profoundly unsettling about standing in a place where 2,000 people once lived and mined for gold, now completely surrendered to the silence of nature. I was aiming my camera at the old Home Comfort Hotel when I saw it, movement in the window of the second story. I paused, squinting through the viewfinder. Framing the glass was the figure of a woman with long, pale hair. She was wearing a long, white dress, the kind of heavy, high-collared gown you would only see in old sepia-toned photographs. Her face was strikingly beautiful, but completely expressionless. She was staring straight ahead, not at me, but down the empty road behind me. Josh had come to find me, and was now standing beside me looking at pictures on his camera. Nudging him, I whispered, "Hey, look at the hotel window." He lowered his camera and scoffed. "Very funny. You photoshopping something?" "No. Look at it. There's someone inside." Before he could look up, the woman's eyes darted directly to mine. The shift was so sudden and unnatural that I dropped my camera against my chest. Her gaze felt like a physical strike. Then, without a sound, she slowly nodded. A sudden, jarring vibration shattered the silence. The distant, throbbing hum of engines broke through the mountain air. Illicit dirt bikers were ripping up the trail, violating the town's strict preservation laws and tearing through the delicate alpine environment. I turned around, intending to yell at the riders. When I looked back at the hotel a second later, the woman in the window was gone. The entire second floor was pitch black. The riders had ignored me and zipped past us in a blur, oblivious to anything around them. As the last engine faded into the canyon, the cold air felt even more suffocating. Josh was suddenly pale, staring at the front of the hotel. He didn't say a word, just grabbed his tripod and headed back to the car. I looked at the hotel one last time, my breath freezing in the air. That was when I noticed the front door of the hotel, which had been locked with a heavy padlock moments before, was standing wide open, and the terrifying feeling of being watched washed over me. I didn't stick around to see what was watching us from the threshold. I scrambled back into the truck, kicked the heater on full blast, and we drove down the mountain in complete silence. Our seventh and final story is about Thurmond, West Virginia. My friends and I thought it would be the perfect spot for a weekend of exploration. We knew the local lore, and an old saying claimed that the only difference between hell and Thurmond is that a river runs through Thurmond. We just assumed it was a nod to the wild, lawless days of the early 1900s coal rush. But we were wrong. We arrived just before twilight, crossing the single-lane bridge that serves as the town's only real vehicle access. Instantly, the modern world vanished behind us. Tucked into the steep folds of the gorge, the main street consists of rows of boarded-up gabled houses and the old, perfectly preserved bank building. We parked our car near the restored C&O train depot visitor center. Things started to go wrong as soon as we started walking. The forest crowding the edges of the town was unnaturally silent. No birds, no insects. It was just the sound of our own boots crunching on the gravel. My friend Miranda pointed out that a single amber glow was shining from the second-story window of the abandoned bank building. Since the National Park Service maintains these buildings as historical landmarks, we assumed at first that a park ranger might be doing a late-night check. But as we got closer, the glow shifted. It cast a harsh, unnatural blue shadow on the drawn curtains. A silhouette of a man with an impossibly elongated, crooked neck, swaying slowly from side to side. We froze. The silence of the gorge was suddenly broken by the sound of train wheels squealing on the tracks. Not the distant rumble of an Amtrak train, but the screeching of heavy iron braking violently just outside the station. We spun around. Sitting right in front of the empty train station was an antique steam engine. It was shrouded in a heavy, coiling fog, completely silent except for the groaning of its metal gears. Not a single person was visible through the windows of the passenger cars, but we could hear a faint, muffled clinking of glasses and low, guttural laughter pouring from within. It sounded like an endless, raucous party. Before we could even process the impossible sight, the station's building's wooden front doors slowly creaked open. The wispy figure of another man appeared, pacing along the tracks by the train. He was dressed in a tattered, old-fashioned railroad uniform, his head also unnaturally tipped sideways, just like the man in the bank's window. He suddenly stopped and slowly turned his head, looking directly at us. "We need to leave now," Miranda frantically whispered, grabbing my sleeve. We turned to run back toward the swinging bridge, but the moment our feet hit the gravel road, the darkness of the gorge seemed to reach out. The dense, blue-stemmed grass that had just been lining our path was now impossibly high, forming a wall that made the road half its original width. Looking over my shoulder, the train's conductor had appeared on the porch. His head tilted until it touched his shoulder, and a wet, gravelly whisper escaped his lips. "You forgot something." We bolted, running blind, tearing through the overgrown foliage, driven by pure panic. We somehow managed to find the bridge and scrambled into the car. My hands were shaking so violently it took me 4 tries to get the key into the ignition. As we peeled out, the red taillights of our vehicle briefly illuminated the trees behind us. Standing right at the edge of the tree line was the entire town's population, all 5 remaining residents and the conductor, all staring at us with the exact same unnaturally tilted heads. I didn't stop driving until we hit Charleston. We swore we'd never go back. Today, almost a week later, I finally decided to unpack my backpack to do laundry. Sitting right at the bottom of my bag, wrapped in a scrap of stained linen, was a piece of cold, heavy coal. That is all I have for you, and I hope you enjoyed these scary stories about old haunted towns. I don't know about you guys, but I just added all these places to visit onto my bucket list. Anyways, until next time. You've been listening to Don't Whistle to the Wind. And as the tale ends, the candles have burned down to nothing, and the salt lines we drew have surely failed as the shadows have crept in. Don't let them catch you, and don't turn off the light.